The second budget workshop for our 18-year budget. Friday, I delivered the State of the City and combined budget address, and we laid out some vision for the future of Orlando, but also some of the planned budget expenditures, especially in the area of additional police officers, firefighters, and efforts on increasing our affordable housing options. By the way, did you guys like that sizzle reel? Before, I thought that was pretty darn good. I hadn't seen it till the day before, but communications did a fantastic job on showing how much stuff we have been doing. All right, we have our second budget workshop, and I would like all of the staff of the Office of Management and Budget to stand up and let us recognize you for your efforts this year. All right, Brian, we brought a standing room only crowd for the budget. We're going to spend $1.2 billion or so, and hardly anybody here to see it.
Well, I think the speech as well as the reel kind of speak to a lot of the activities. So here's some of the numbers behind a lot of the activities that we know go on in our community. First, just a general agenda. I want to talk about a budget overview, again, get into the general fund and to other funds. This presentation, we're going to touch more on the departmental staffing and the program enhancements that we heard a little bit about on Friday, as well as some of our items in the capital improvement program, and then finalize with next steps. So first, since July 10th, only a few weeks ago, there really hasn't been many changes. The first kind of small one is we've refined our revenue projections. They were modified slightly, less than a couple $100,000. We also moved some positions off of the general fund. These are positions that were 100% funded by other operations in our city, and we just thought it was clearer from a financial perspective rather than having transfers between funds, just have those positions rest in those other funds. We refined our funding for the new public safety initiatives, police officers and firefighters, as well as some enhancements in those departments. We have a draft list of capital improvement projects, and at this point, all funds still remain balanced. So I'm going to run through these next slides fairly quickly because, again, not much has changed. As you'll see, our total general fund is still $446 million with ad valorem revenues making up the largest portion of that. Again, that was an increase of about $19 million or so from the previous year. Intergovernmental was also an increase related to our relationship with OUC. And we had about $1 million in sales and use tax related to funding that we received from the state of Florida. And here's how it breaks out from a graphic pie chart standpoint in its percentages. At the last budget workshop, we talked a little bit about the property tax implications, both of the legislature and of the last few amendments, and potentially where we could go in the future. So I wanted to point out some numbers that we got from comparisons related to our values forms. So in 2017, the total assessed value as a city was just under $28 billion. That was an increase of about $3 billion from the previous year. Our new construction was just over $1 billion of that increase, which generated about $7 million in new revenues. The initial Save Our Homes exemption, so the one that was approved many, many years ago, results in about a differential of about $1.9 billion, or a loss of almost $13 million in revenue. So this was not the newest amendment. This was the one that was the initial approval. Just another note on the first 25,000 essentially results in about $900 million, or a loss of $6 million. So this is the newer property tax amendments that we went through a few years back for the commercial and non-homestead caps. The differential is about almost $3 billion, resulting in a loss of almost a little over $18 million. And then that second 25,000 was resulting in about $700 million, or a loss of almost $5 million. So the most recent amendments were somewhere in the neighborhood of about $23 million of foregone revenues that we would have received into the city for those caps and those property tax reforms. And I wanted to also point out that at this point, about 2/3 of our parcels are at their capped value. We also talked about how the city is growing. This slide is really just to show that we're growing pretty much across the entire city. As you see, the average increase was about 12.5%. As we know, District 1 is seeing the largest increase, but I really just wanted to point out that every district within our city is having almost double-digit.
Brian, is that just on residential?
This is on all,
It's on,
the complete valuations for the districts.
did some of the universal stuff not come on last year? I thought they had I just would have thought District 6 with some of the commercial stuff would have been a little higher than 9%.
I think when we were looking at it, some of it, especially the newest ones, are usually about a year lag. So they might have come on partially or not all the way. But again, these are the numbers comparing our most recent trim forms to last year's violations. Okay. And same really goes for the type of property. Again, we're growing almost all the various different kinds, from commercial to multifamily, single family, all are showing growths. So the big thing that I wanted to point out from these two slides is that there's not any one thing that's growing completely disproportionate to the others, and we're seeing growth in all of our districts as well as all of our different property types. On the expenditure side for the general fund, again, balance to the revenues at 446. The largest is obviously salaries and benefits. Again, a pie chart that represents those. We broke out a little, excuse me, a little more of the benefits after some conversations that we had at the last workshop. Again, related to payroll taxes, general employee retirements, health insurance, other compensation, and public safety retirement plans. And here's those various categories with actual numbers associated with them. So again, we tried to just break it down a little bit further so you could see some more detail in our salary and benefits categories. Roughly make up $300+ million of our 446 number here. From a department perspective, again, public safety is the largest initiative, representing almost 60% of our budget. I did want to point out that public safety in this budget accounts for about 60+% of our increase. So of our roughly $22 million increase in the general fund, roughly 60% of that increase went right into public safety. In the previous years, we've also had some conversations about what non-departmental means. As you see, it's a decent percentage at 14%. It really makes up three major things, which is the tax increment payments that we have to pay into the CRAs, the transfers that we do for capital, as well as operational support to some of our other funds, and then also debt service. On the non-general fund, again, some highlights last year comparison to this year. We talked about a lot of these in the previous presentation, and not much has changed. Again, water reclamation and solid waste are both foregoing the automatic increase in this budget. Stormwater slight decrease was just related to us front-loading some of the capital into the current budget. Parking and venues, a lot of that relates to the Geico Garage, moving between those two enterprises, as well as some of the service lots around Geico Garage. Internal service funds, again, didn't change much from our previous presentation. I think we talked about a lot of these. These are just general increases are related to just the operation of the city as a whole, and these internal service funds servicing their needs. Other funds, we addressed a lot of these last time with the new additions for the school crossing guards and the new sites. We talked about the CRA and its contribution to Project GTO, which the mayor hit on in the state of the city, related to a lot of the work that's happening there, from the Paramore housing projects to the under eye to just regular Project GTO initiatives. The building code decrease was really more about a one-time expenditure on the EDIS system in the last budget. Special assessment, we had one of our assessments get off the books. And then the SHIP funds, I wanted to point out, because this was a decrease. This is the state housing funding that we get. Overall, the housing operation from the feds and the state was fairly stable, but we did see this decrease in the state funding related to this program. So these next couple slides, I wanted to touch again on the staffing and the program enhancements that we've tried to incorporate into this budget to address some of the comments and the priorities going forward. As you see, we have roughly about a 60 position increase. Again, this is from adopted to proposed. So this is all the new positions that are included in this budget, as well as any positions that we would have done through our budget review committee throughout the year. Again, heavily in the public safety realm with the 27 sworn in the new budget, plus 4 civilian positions, which you'll see as I detail later on. The other thing that I wanted to point out from a position standpoint is, even with the increase in positions from our growing population, we're still basically at the same 14-year low ratio for employees to residents. So I think, even though we're growing our staff, our city size and our population is growing at roughly the same rate that we're able to add staff, and we're keeping that at that same efficient level. So from a department standpoint, just to kind of give you a little legend for this, the italicized ones are positions that we've added in the BRC, and the bold items are ones that are part of this budget. So police department had added a fiscal and management analyst, and now with this budget, 15 new police officers. That doesn't count the positions from last year's budget that were part of the adopted, where we unfroze and added some positions ago. But this is all from the new budget, BRC, and then the new budget. Fire department, all new positions, three civilians, fiscal coordinator, fiscal specialist, deputy fire marshal, and then the 12 new firefighters that we've discussed. Families, Parks, and Rec have a fleet and facilities coordinator, as well as 4 part-time recreational specialists related to the extended hours at some of our community centers. Our office, the Office of Business and Financial Services, is increasing procurement by 1 agent, as well as putting aside some money to further refine our digital services staff and trying to get our digital city hall and our image, both from the forward and internal looking of our website and our internal services. So this digital service staff, I'm sure you'll be hearing about this as we go forward in the months to come. Excuse me. Executive offices during the year, again, a collaborative partnership manager and a graphic designer. And in this budget, we're adding a new PIO, as well as refining some of the positions in the Blueprint MBE area and HR. Economic development, again, this is one of those items where we did not wait for a new budget to adopt. We've been constantly going to BRC to address the needs of our business community, as you can see from the variety of positions that we've added throughout the year. Same with Public Works. So from a programmatic enhancement side, these are just some of the larger increases, or the increases that we saw in the departments related to these initiatives. For police and fire, as you see, fully funding our pension requirements was an increase of, again, we talked about this, over $6 million. We reduced the attrition allowance, or basically the allowance for additional staff to be hired, by $1 million in this budget. That $1 million, when you look at it from an average, equates to about $450,000 for police and roughly a little over $300,000 for fire. So this is additional budget capacity that these two departments are getting just by us reducing that savings target that our departments have been able to meet throughout the years. And again, some of the new positions in each of these operations, from the new firefighters at 1.1 to the new police officers at 1.2, and some of the civilians. Again, Parks and Rec, the extended hours, the community centers, the new part-time positions, and then some additional fleet facility funding for that area. Business financial services, the biggest increase is related to some of the IT contracting related to body cams and Microsoft, as well as some of the other licensing that we're having. And again, the digital services staffing and procurement staffing. I did want to point out, when we talk about public safety, sometimes it gets missed that there are other elements of public safety that are not in the police and fire's budget. This is a good example of them, where something that we're supporting body cams within business financial services budget, as well as the debt service related to some of the new stations and police headquarters are in the non-departmental areas. So even, there are some other areas of the city that are still in that public safety realm. So I wanted to point that out. Transportation, the 900 is not new debt. It's really just transferring the Sunrail debt service. It used to be housed in economic development, but with the creation of the new department, we've moved this into that department's balance sheet, essentially, and then related to some office build-out space. And finally, Public Works, expanded funding for right-of-way maintenance. This has to do with a lot of just keeping up with our right-of-way program, some of the herbicides and mowing, but to my knowledge, it's not any additional cycles in that realm. It's really just keeping up with our growing program. Executive offices, we have some increased funding for community organizations, as well as some additional funding, a variety of different items for communications, such as translation services, some increased funding for our neighborhood summit, which is always well received in the community, and some Greenwood Cemetery maintenance. Economic development, as we talked about, there's a new investment in Project DTO under I-4 in Paramore of almost $4 million. And and Orlando Venues is implementing some of the Wi-Fi and some of that capital costs that we've paid for over the last couple of years, so they have some operational costs there. Our 2018 capital improvement program, this is the draft list that we put together by the funding source with all the departments. I will mention that we're still fine-tuning this, seeing if there's available funding now to preload any of these projects, and maybe, so these numbers may change a little bit, but here's where we are today. So you look at an increase from last year's adopted to this year's proposed. A lot of that is coming in the form of wastewater, and then the other realm is Community Development Fund, which is a lot of the Project DTO initiatives that we're doing there. Our capital improvement program, I did want to note that this is about $1 million increase from the previous year. Again, this is an increased funding for police of over $200,000, $200,000 for fire department. Both of those are for equipment needs. FPR for some additional park maintenance and facilities, playground renovations, an additional about $300,000. And then we do have some funding in here for some emergency operations center renovations. All those are new or increased funding from the previous year. This slide I wanted to point out, this is kind of a cross-section of how we categorize some of these values that you've seen on the last couple pages. Again, this is a little subjective. Some of them could probably be in multiple categories, but this is just how they show in their books. But the big thing I wanted to point out is that the vast majority of our $93 million is related to transportation and public works, water reclamation. So next steps, budget calendar. Again, we have a tentatively balanced budget. We will continue to refine these numbers before our September public hearings, and again in any kind of communications that we will have with your offices throughout the month of August and September. But at this point in time, both the general fund and all other funds remain balanced. The total budget is about 3.5% increase, again at that $1.2 billion that the mayor referenced. I did want to point out that from a general fund perspective, this budget grew at about 5.3%, and last year's year-over-year growth was 5.6%. So this budget is actually growing at a smaller rate than we did last year, but pretty much right on point with where we saw the growth. So for the last couple of years, we've been stable at roughly about 5.5% growth in the general fund. Just a couple, again, next steps. This afternoon on consent, you'll see some items to set the millage rate. Again, we're proposing to keep the millage rate the same, 6.65 for the city, one mil for Downtown Development Board, 1 mil for the Downtown South Neighborhood Improvement District. These will be on council this afternoon, which will allow us to really to sign the forms and present the trim forms to the property appraiser. Again, final millage rates and resolutions all come at those September public hearings, which you'll see on the 6th and the 25th. And with that, I open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, team. Questions, comments? Commissioner Sheehan, then Commissioner Stewart, then Commissioner Ortiz.
Well, the only thing I'd like to say, and I'll say it again, is, I'd like to see some dedicated money for brick repair, because it seems like we always take the brick fund, put it into sidewalk repair, which is really important. And with all the school growth, we've been doing so much sidewalk improvement. But, I just really think we need to do something about our brick streets, because the maintenance has been dreadful. And, I would really like to see some dedicated funding for that. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you very much. Am I okay? Am I on?
Yep, you're on.
No, I'm off now. I'm on. There you go. I want to follow up along the same lines, because the right-of-way maintenance issues are concerns of mine. It's not a week goes by somebody doesn't call me and say, we call ourselves a city beautiful, but we don't pick up trash. So, and I'll work with Rick Howard about that. A couple of quick questions on it. One is, you mentioned on the property tax analysis, what's the definition of a vacant value increased? Is that property going from vacant to something else?
I think it might. I'm going to just let me get back to you on that, Commissioner.
Okay. Yeah,
my first thought is that it's just related to land values increasing, because again, there's not a structure on those. Again, these are the classifications from the property appraiser, so I don't want to speak for their areas. But.
Good. And then I want to just recap briefly the Save Our Homes and the Save Our Businesses and all the rest of those initiatives. All those have limited our ability just this past year in terms of $12.9 million. 891,000. Is that correct?
I'm sorry,
5.9 million.
So we had
18.2 million and 4.7 million.
12.9, 5.9, 18.2 and 4.7.
Okay.
But that's all going
If
back
we-
to the
if we
original
didn't have
3%
those,
and then
yeah,
the original.
didn't
and
have
then-
those in and so it goes back to that, what we had discussed before, is that when you artificially adjust what we're doing, you don't allow market to take that hit.
Correct. I did want to note that on that aspect, a few years ago, when the values were actually going down, we were still getting the CPI or whatever the allowable rate was. So just in the last 5 years, the differential on the 3% side went from about 250 to this 1.9 number.
Mm-hmm.
So when homes are growing, we're getting disproportionately hit by additional revenues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've said it before, and we've created a tax-based system based upon growth and based upon the ability to take really vacant land and put houses on them. But we have a desire of our city to go and do infill, which becomes a much harder decision and has less property tax impact on us, but it is the right thing to do because that's where cities ought to go. We ought to go into infill. Our tax base is, a little cockeyed. Thank you very much. I want to also extend my thanks to your staff. I've got a couple other questions we'll cover when we do our briefings, but y'all do great work, and this is difficult work, and I won't tell how much I appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Stewart, to clarify your comment there, that's not the tax system we created.
Oh, no, yes,
because of the
correct.
caps that the legislature's created.
And
fundamentally means that if we develop vacant property, we do better in terms of the amount of new tax revenue than if we convert an existing use to a new use.
And then we're stuck with the fact that we can't make decisions based upon future tax revenue. We have to make decisions on land use based upon the proper use and not about taxes. It's just that we just got our hands tied. I mean, Commissioner Sheehan says it often, but we just got our hand tied on a lot of things that we're doing. But the limited amount of growth that we have has allowed us to continue on the same path, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ortiz and Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. In reference to what you were just saying in terms of Tallahassee making those decisions, we need to teach our communities what these guys are doing in Tallahassee. We definitely need to inform our communities how these legislators are making decisions without counting on our communities and checking with our communities. And one of the problems we're having is that these legislators, and I'm not talking about all of them, but some of those up in Tallahassee with a lot of influence, what they do is they legislate without checking with commissioners or mayors or with the constituency, and they're making decisions that is affecting us all. Brian, thank you after that little speech. Thank you for your great work and your staff. I have a couple of questions. One of them is, what's the difference between the property value gain and the property value loss because of the 25,000 exemption coming up?
I'm sorry, Commissioner. I don't.
The gain in terms of because of the buildings we have and the new buildings, new structures, property value that we are gaining.
So we're gaining about $3 billion in new value.
Okay, and we are losing.
In this 2017, we're losing 1.9 billion in value from the old Save Our Homes and 2.7 resulting in the new commercial and non-homestead caps. So the caps are more than what we're gaining.
So the difference, okay.
Yep.
All right, that's what I want. I want to support Commissioner Sheehan's statement about dedicating a fund for brick repair, if we could, because it's visible. And I think she has a great part of our district is in bricks, and it's built with bricks, and we definitely need some funding. This is something that we've been talking about for years. We need to replace a lot of those streets and do the foundation because it's getting really deteriorated. So, and the other monies that we believe we need is for code enforcement. We have not spoken about code enforcement in terms of safety. We need officers to work nighttime and weekends. And this is something that is all over the city. And I can only speak for my district, but from time to time I go to other districts and I see the same problem. And we have started to do some sweeps or whatnot, but we need more officers dedicated to code enforcement. So I don't know how we can adjust our budget here to dedicate a few more, or what do we need to do. But I think we have a great need for code enforcement officers. So,
Well, Commissioner, we'll continue to look at that, but in our initial conversations, I think we have a very new code enforcement staff. From an experience standpoint, we actually have a couple of vacancies, so we are trying to make sure that operation gets the funding it receives.
I'm telling you, my district is in need of more code enforcement officers. I don't know about the other district, the other commissioners, but I know mine is. And so I'm going to keep pushing for that. I'm going to keep talking about that because there's a lot of property value we can gain by maintaining our streets and our homes, in a better state. And I think the amount of work that there's out there for the amount of police and the code enforcement officers we have is a little bit overwhelming. So that's something that we probably need to discuss a little further, as you said. You mentioned that 60% of the gain in property value went to public service.
Correct. Over 60% of our increased from the general fund perspective went to public
Can you
safety.
give me a ballpark about how much would that be?
About 14 million of our 22 million.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, sir. I just want to say great job to the team. I'm quite excited to see that this budget cycle, the majority also is going to public safety, but also adequate and affordable homes and housing. And I think for a very long time, that should have been the focus, and now we really are doing an amazing job. When we talk about public safety, I think that's a part of it. When we give folks somewhere decent to stay, and that when we invest in our community centers, and I see you're investing quite a bit in our family parks and recreation, where most of our programs and our empowerment comes from when we start talking about from incubator to career in our senior programs. In these at-risk neighborhoods, of course, I'm a little biased. Seems like there's quite a bit of funding going into District 5. And I really appreciate it because that's where there's a lot of, I call it the tales of two cities, where we have the most affluent in that economic machine, but there's also where there's folk incomes are almost $12,000. So to see staff, and thank you for your support, Mayor, on paying attention to that west side of Orlando in that Paramore area, and making sure that while we're building this great city, that now we're really lifting up the people as we lift up the city, and I'm quite pleased. Now, one thing I do want to say, and it's about the venues. I saw that on certain events we'll have Wi-Fi. Is it possible we can make sure that all events we can put that Wi-Fi in?
I'm seeing head nods, yes.
Yeah, because it really is rough trying to get some frequency out of there. So I want to make sure that every event is covered. We're doing some amazing things over at the venues. That's all for me, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Good job.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stewart.
You know what, I am, following up what Commissioner Ortiz has mentioned, I was looking on here about code enforcement. Was code enforcement considered an enterprise fund?
No, I mean, some of it's in the general fund, and some we have a code lien fund as well that funds some of that operation.
Okay. I mean, Commissioner Ortiz has got a good idea, but I was trying to find out where any increases we have or where we stand in the code enforcement, and couldn't find it in here. So would you, when we get together, would you please share some of that information with me?
Sure.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes our budget workshop.